This week's Torah portion, Parshat Tzav, introduces us to the technical elements of a lot of ancient rituals that we don't do anymore. Burnt offerings and Silden offerings and guilt offerings and Thanksgiving offerings and all kinds of things that used to take place in the tabernacle in ancient times as the Israelites wandered in the wilderness. And then when we finally built the temple in Jerusalem, the first and the second times. But these rituals we don't really perform anymore. And so you might ask, why do we have to continue to read this insanely boring Torah portion about rituals that no one does anymore? You might ask, why do we... Well, I'm so glad you asked. And the reason is that ritual is important. Rituals and structures that we impose on ourselves help us to be the kind of people that we want to be, help us to think about the things that we don't spend enough time thinking about, and help direct our attention and our focus to the things that ought to occupy our attention and focus, as opposed to the things that too often occupy our attention and our focus. When I was in rabbinical school, I worked as an intern at Cedar Sinai Medical Center as a chaplain intern, and my job was to spend 4.5 hours listening as intently as I possibly could to what the newly admitted Jewish patients in that hospital had to express about what they were concerned with, what they were worried about, what was going on in their hearts and in their minds. And then I would come home and I would get to Amy, and Amy wanted to tell me all about her day. If you've met Amy, you know she is a little extroverted. And we found ourselves getting in fights and arguments every Tuesday and Thursday because, frankly, when I got home, I couldn't listen to anyone say anything about anything. And she got annoyed with the fact that I was kind of blowing her off, and I got annoyed at the fact that she was talking to me, and we kept having conflict. And so we made a rule. We created a ritual, which was that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a half hour when I got home to myself, to change my clothes, to look at the mail, to veg, to lie in the bed and stare into space, whatever it was. However, after a half hour, I had to be present, and I had to be there for her, and I had to be a sentient member of our household. And we created a ritual to help us be who we needed to be for each other when we were finding it difficult to be who we needed to be for each other. Rituals help us do the things that we need to do for our spiritual health. And so as we celebrate this particular Shabbat, as we celebrate the themes of awareness, acceptance, and inclusion, and especially celebrate Temple Beth El's partnership with the Jewish Association for Residential Care, better known as JARC in our community, we find that it doesn't matter who you are or at what stage of life you are, ritual matters. For many, many, many years, Temple Beth El was proud to welcome the residents of several of the JARC homes to our Shabbat morning worship service before our renovation work and COVID made it impossible to continue our Shabbat morning service in that fashion. I will tell you that the residents from JARC were often more regular in their attendance to worship than some of the members of our own congregation. And there is a resident from JARC whose name is Marcia. And Marcia came with her house, the Broomer house, every week. And it happened that Marcia's mother passed away. And it was terribly sad for Marcia. And even though her mother had lived to a ripe old age, and Marcia herself was in her middle years, still it was incredibly difficult emotionally for Marcia to really sort of wrap her head around this loss, and she was in really deep grief. Now, I don't think that Marcia knew all the words to Kaddish, but she knew that the prayer that you say at the end of services is the prayer that you say for people that you love who have died. And I think one of the holiest moments I have ever experienced in this synagogue was that Shabbat morning. It was a tough service for Marcia all the way through. And then when we got to the last prayer, and all of the residents from Jark knew that this was the prayer where Marcia was going to say Kaddish for her mother, all of the residents from Jark, from her house, the Broomer house, and the others that were with us, gathered around her almost in a group hug to support her as she made it through this prayer. And then the rest of the members of Temple Bethel, who were there worshiping with her that morning, many of whom worshiped with her every Shabbat morning, gathered around our dear friends from Jark to form one tight-knit hug of humanity to help this woman grieve the loss of her mother. And the healing that was afforded from that ritual, a ritual that Marcia might not have understood in the fullness of the ritual, but it didn't matter, because what the ritual did was afforded her an opportunity to express her grief, to share her love for her mother, and to feel the warmth of the embrace of her community and communities that loved her and were there to support her. And it was through the performance of that ritual, which drew all of that love into that singular space, that the light of God's presence shone like a beacon from the Starkov Chapel at Temple Bethel that Shabbat morning. And the light of that moment still lives inside me. It still burns in my soul, in my spirit, and in my memory. Rituals matter. They help us become who we need to be. They provide us with the spiritual resources to get through what we're not sure we can get through, or to celebrate with even more energy than we knew we could muster. And so on this Shabbat, as we celebrate this wonderful Shabbat evening ritual, which we celebrate every Friday night, how blessed are we that we get to celebrate this all together, that each of us is guided by the gift of Jewish text and tradition and ritual to help us shape our spiritual selves. How blessed are we to have our friends and our guests from the Jewish Association for Residential Care and a very special bat mitzvah, which is going to take place later tonight. And we are so grateful that we will all have the gift of this moment to try to draw nearer to each other and nearer to God. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.